If you clicked this video, I am sure you are in the research phase of planning your trip to Switzerland, and I can guarantee this is not the first video that you clicked, although if you did, I appreciate the YouTube algorithm. I just completed a 6-day road trip across Switzerland. It was my first time visiting Switzerland and my first solo road trip across Europe. I'm excited to share with you what I learned along the way. This video will be kind of general information, but if you're really interested in seeing the nitty-gritty of each location that I visited, I just put out a 4-part series on YouTube. You can check that out with all of the regions that I visited across Switzerland. So I hope you guys enjoy that, but let's jump into some of the overview items here. Okay, for general purposes, let's just set the scene. Switzerland is located in Europe and it is sandwiched between Austria, Germany, Liechtenstein, France, and Italy. It is not part of the European Union, so the currency is not euros, it's actually Swiss francs, and here's the only coin that I brought back from that. Credit cards are accepted pretty much everywhere, but I did get some cash because I had no idea what the situation would be before I started. It has 26 cantons in the country, which are, you can consider them member states, and they're different regions with different rules, regulations, traditions. They are vastly different across the country. The size of Switzerland can be equated to Vermont and New Hampshire combined, so pretty tiny. It's actually smaller than the state of Texas, if that gives you a perspective. There's no Swiss language. There's actually 4 languages that are spoken in Switzerland: French, Italian, Romansh, and Swiss German. Not German, but Swiss German. You will find that they are pretty much organized by towns closest to borders. So if you're approaching the Germany area of Switzerland, you can expect to be speaking Swiss German in those regions. Same thing goes for as you approach France. It's more French-speaking regions. I found that as I was traveling, I would just look at the names of the towns and I would just guess what type of language that word was. Some more complex than others. But if I looked at a word and I was like, that looks like an Italian word, I knew they'd be speaking Italian in that region. Probably not my best tidbit, but that's how I figured it out. I found that most people in the cities, like the denser cities, spoke English just fine, so I had no problem communicating there. But as I got into the more rural areas, I did find a number of towns that nobody spoke English. Nobody that I came across spoke English. So I used Google Translate to communicate, but also if you're going somewhere and you don't speak their language, try and learn those key phrases just to kind of set the stage for a conversation with somebody. Learn how to say hello, please, thank you. I also knew how to say, do you speak English in their language? So they knew that I was trying, but I really didn't have much more than that. And I found that as long as I put forth a little bit of effort, the locals were really receptive to helping in any way they could. So again, Google Translate really helped me with that. And, just some hand gestures as well got me to where I needed to go. As far as transportation, you have 2 major airports and then obviously a ton of regional airports, the 2 major ones being Zurich in the north and Geneva in the west. You also have Milan in Italy, which is to the south. I think those 3 are probably your main airports to consider when you're flying into Switzerland. Now, once you're in the country, Switzerland's public transportation is some of the best in the world. You have boats, buses, trains, cable cars. All of these things will get you to wherever you want to go in the country. Honestly, there was not a rural, rugged region that I visited that didn't also have a bus or a train to it. I wouldn't worry about renting a car, though I did. That's what I'll cover in a minute. If you're without a car, you can get around the country just fine. Now, I will recommend looking into the Swiss Travel Pass, which it's Travel Pass, but there's a number of different tiers beneath that. This is something that you can purchase that will reduce the costs of this transportation. So definitely look into it, see what makes sense for your particular visit, how long you're going to be there, where you're going to be visiting, and you can determine the best pass for that. I didn't buy one, but I did see the prices of some of these things, and I can't imagine spending all of that money. I did a couple of cable car rides without this pass, and they averaged about 50 to 70 bucks just to get up the mountain. And there are some that are way more expensive than that. So definitely look into these travel passes before going because it will save you money in the long run. Another thing that's really helpful is downloading the SBB mobile app. This is the app that you can refer to for any of the transportation. So if you want to know how to get from point A to point B, you plug that into the app and it will show you the best way, the most efficient way to get there, the times of those individual pieces of transportation, whether it's a train or a bus, and then you could purchase your ticket right there. So super helpful app. I used it pretty much daily on my trip. Okay, so for my trip specifically, I actually rented a car, and I chose to do this because I really like being spontaneous. As much as I love the planning part of vacations, I really like leaving that flexibility and spontaneity. And I just thought that if I was in a train passing a really cute town and I wanted to stop and get out, I'd be really frustrated if I couldn't do that. So I wanted to give myself that flexibility of just driving around and stopping whenever I felt like it. So if you're considering doing something similar, renting a car, a couple things I learned along the way were, number one, they drive on the right side of the road, so there's that. Number two, they have both automatic and manual rentals, so no problem there, whatever you prefer. Number three, make sure your vehicle has a vignette, which is a little sticker that goes in the windshield. I never saw anyone physically scan it at any point, but I know it's for the tolls, essentially for using their motorways. I think it's just an automated thing as you're driving along, so you have to have that if you're driving in Switzerland. This came with my rental car, but if you are coming from somewhere else and your car doesn't have it, I think you can get it at post offices or gas stations. It seems pretty readily accessible, so you shouldn't have a problem finding this little vignette sticker. If you're from the US and you've never driven in Europe before, or maybe anywhere else in the world and you've never driven in Europe, you want to learn the road signs. They're very different than in the US. So what I did before my trip is I actually went onto a website and I screenshotted all the road signs in Switzerland and what they meant. So I was able to pull that up as I was driving around to better understand what I was driving into. Some of the signs were super intuitive and then others were incredibly confusing. I was coming out of this long tunnel somewhere in, I think I was heading towards Ticino, which is southern Switzerland. And as I'm coming out of the tunnel, I see a sign that looks like no cars allowed here. So I almost came to a dead stop because I'm like, what? I just got out of this tunnel. Where else am I supposed to go? And then I referred to that screenshot and I found that that sign meant something about you're no longer allowed to cross over the lane, or there's some, I forget it. I'll put it on the screen now so we all know together. But it was just really funny because I had no idea what it meant. I thought it meant something and it actually didn't. And so just learn the road signs before you go because you will be more confident as you're navigating the roadways. And also, I am so impressed with the Swiss people and how on target they are with the speed limit. And I think I figured it out because I actually was billed a ticket once I got home from my trip. They go the exact speed limit that is posted. And it's interesting because you'll be on an expressway and you will have 80 kilometers per hour and everyone is going exactly 80 kilometers per hour, and it will drop down to 60 and people will brake to get to 60 within that 100-meter span. They are really diligent on going the exact mileage speed limit posted, and you want to be sure you're doing the same thing. They have those speed cameras all over the place, and that's how I got my ticket. I was going just 5 kilometers over the speed limit through a town. I was, in fact, trying to break down to the speed limit because it was in that changing period, changing span. But still, they got me, and I think it was about the equivalent of $50 US. So just be aware of that and know that they go the speed limit. Okay, so accommodations. They are completely dependent on your budget and what type of experience you're going for. You can select from a camping trip to staying in hostels or hotels or Airbnbs, number of different options. For me, I eliminated the camping trip. That just wasn't the trip for me this time around, and not really a fan of hostels. So I chose to stay in hotels and Airbnbs. The first hotel was in Lucerne and it was great. It was just a standard hotel, great location. I will put all of this in the description, don't you worry. One funny thing, I plugged in my hair dryer, which just know never to do that in old buildings because I knocked out the power for the entire building. It apparently wasn't the first time that happened, but that was, I stayed there one night and that was my farewell to that building. I told them at checkout that was my fault and they were like, yeah, it's all right. We'll get the power up and running shortly. The second place I stayed was in Ticino, and that was a hotel/restaurant. So it was mostly a restaurant, and above it there were a few floors of bedrooms, and I had a bedroom that had one twin bed and a very tiny bathroom, and honestly that was all I needed for that stay. I wasn't planning to spend my time at the hotel. It was literally just to sleep, and the staff was super nice. The restaurant was closing when I arrived. I got there pretty late and they kept it open to make me dinner, which was delicious. And then they were very accommodating in the morning and just making sure I enjoyed my stay. So you'll get places like that in a lot of these smaller cities, these restaurants/hotels. So don't overlook that. They are great options. In some of the more remote areas, I stayed in Airbnbs. One was a farm and one was a 15th century building that was without electricity after dark. You can find those experiences on Airbnb, and I intentionally booked them because I wanted to have those unique stays, and they were, and they're some of the most memorable of the trip. So you can find those as well. So even if you're not in those major cities, there are places to stay in those rugged locations. And the best stay of my trip was in Grimentz, and that was at Hotel Alpina, which was a full-out hotel in the center of town. It had the most spacious room, the most comfortable bed, and the friendliest staff. So really loved that experience. But like I said, I went from staying at this really old historic structure to this, I'm not gonna say ritzier, but it was a nicer hotel. So I had that variety on my trip, and you can do the same if you're interested. And you'll probably notice that I'm not sharing prices on anything because I really don't like to do that. Prices change all the time depending on the season, depending on when you watch this video. This could be years from when I actually published it. So I'm not one to list prices, but if you're interested in any of these options, definitely look into it for yourself and you'll figure out what the current rate is for your experience. What to eat when you're in Switzerland is a loaded question. I'd say probably try to eat as much as you can because the food is phenomenal. Again, you have all these regions across Switzerland which have vastly different offerings, but I tried to nail down the staples. And for me, that was having a bratwurst in the Swiss German-speaking regions, having some fondue, definitely eating the chocolate and all of the cheese. In Ticino, you're so close to Italy. All of that Italian food influence is really top notch. I think I had it in Lugano, this amazing pizza, and I had gelato. I did go to Italy for a minute. You can see that all in the series, but definitely eat as much of the Swiss food as you can. You will never get a stomach ache. It is delicious. It is clean. I really miss it. Oh, there was one thing that I wanted to try, which was something called glacial wine. And it is something you can only experience in a couple of areas of Switzerland, I think. I actually didn't get the opportunity to try it, but I remember writing it down ahead of my trip because it was something that I did want to try, and I guess I just missed it. But if you stumble across glacial wine, definitely give it a try. Best time of year to visit Switzerland is dependent on what it is you're trying to do. If you're going skiing, obviously you want to visit during the winter. But in general, and I say this for a lot of locations, I like to travel in the shoulder seasons, which are really the fall or the spring, not during the busiest season of the year, which is usually summer. This trip I went in September, but I hear September, October, or April, May are good times to visit. I think September, October is the least rainy, although I did experience rain on my trip. But that is a great time to go to avoid mass tourism and also just have great weather. As far as what to pack, that really depends on the time of year that you're going. So if you're traveling during shoulder season like I was, which was September, you want to plan for every type of weather scenario. I know it's a little annoying to pack for, but honestly, during the day, it was probably in the 60s and 70s Fahrenheit. And at night, it was definitely much cooler, maybe in the 40s, 50s. But also, if you are going up a mountain, whether you're hiking or you're taking a train or gondola up, it is colder at higher altitudes. So you want to prepare with gloves and hats and winter jackets. Even if you're only going to be up there for a little while, you just want to make sure that you're comfortable. Now, if you are a hiker, you want to prepare for long, arduous hikes. Now, you may not be planning that at all, but I found that on trails that I thought were going to be relatively easy, they were harder than I anticipated, maybe a little bit lengthier than I imagined. And that could have just been me not reading the signs properly or just saying, it'll be fine and going for it. So I was thankful that I prepared in advance and I had one of those water bladders that go in a backpack. I had a solar panel and a couple other little things that I carried with me that a headlamp. I ended up hiking at night, so that was unexpected, but I was glad that I had some light to help me out. Just try and bring those little things. They don't take up too much room in a backpack or your suitcase, so they are helpful and they will help you in those unexpected times. And lastly, I think it's important to point out the outlets there. Most of you that are traveling to Europe, you probably already know you need some sort of outlet converter adapter. So they take type C and type J plugs. This green one is a little bulkier and kind of annoying. It doesn't fit in every single outlet, but it is meant to work there, but its bulk prohibits that sometimes. So this white one was really helpful to me. In my series that's already up and posted to YouTube, you will see all the details of the places that I visited, but I'll give you an overview here and you can jump over to those videos when you're done. But basically, here's the map of my trip. This was over the course of 6 days. I did quite a bit of driving. I probably averaged maybe 3 hours a day of driving, which as a solo traveler, I was fine with. I have no problem doing that. I really liked going to experience all these different regions, but just know if you are not into that as much, maybe this map is not the itinerary for your trip. But looking at this, I just want to point out the differences between these regions. So where I started in Stein on Rhein, that is close to the Germany border, and it felt like that. I've never been to Germany, but that is what I imagined Germany to feel like. And it was just this charming area. You drive through a number of just rolling meadows and farmlands, and you arrive in this town, and it was, at the time that I visited, it was super low key. I really didn't see many tourists. There were tourists there, but it was more of the locals just kind of hanging out. And it was just such a beautiful historic place to see. I actually flew into Geneva Airport, so it was 5 hours from there to get to Stein on Rhein. But I did it, and I don't regret it at all. It was a great way to start my trip. The next place was Lucerne, which was absolutely incredible. And this was one of those places that I wished I had delegated a full day at. Instead, I just had a morning, which was fine. I saw so much of the area. The town is just picturesque with its architecture and that bridge. It is really what postcards are made out of, and I would highly recommend it. It is a more touristy location. It's actually, they consider it to be one of the centers of tourism in Switzerland, but it's that great introduction to the Swiss people, their culture, their food, everything, their history, everything is right there for you to check out, and I definitely would recommend a day or two in that city just to explore it. And just a short drive away, I think it was under an hour and a half, maybe just an hour, was Stoos, or the funicular up to Stoos. So from Lucerne, you can get to the mountains very quickly. And then I took the funicular from there to the to the town of Stoos. So in Switzerland, all of these mountain towns, I won't say all of them, but most of these mountain towns require something other than a car to get to the top, either a train or a cable car. It's so impressive to me to see because these towns were built somehow. So was it from people trekking up these mountains? Did they build these gondolas first and then the towns came? I don't know. I have to look into that. Maybe it's a stupid question, but anyway, whenever you're trying to travel up a Swiss mountain, just know that it's probably not by car and you will have to book a cable car. So again, this is a perfect example to use your Swiss travel pass if you purchase that and use the SBB app to actually get your ticket for it. But once you get up to a town like Stoos, they are just these quaint little towns that really, I almost felt bad as a tourist going to because they felt so off-grid. I didn't want to feel like an intruder to the local community. So I did it respectfully, wandering around without peering into people's windows or anything like that. I wouldn't do that anyway. But It was a weird balance because I wanted to see these areas, but I wanted to respect the community that was there. And they also, over the course of the day, seemed to be welcoming because one of the most stunning hikes is right there. You arrive in Stoos and then you take a chairlift up. Once you get to the top, you have phenomenal views of the skyline around there where you see all of the mountain peaks. It was a great introduction for me to see the Alpine region. And from there, I went to Appenzell, which is probably one of the most traditional areas of Switzerland from what I learned. It is just rolling green hills that are dotted with all these little farms and really undisturbed territory. And I spent the day just driving through that area to experience it and eventually arrived at Wasserauen, which is this like adventure capital of Switzerland. I wasn't expecting that. I read into it before I went, but I wasn't expecting it to be so popular. And people were there doing the paragliding, and I think there was rock climbing and lots of hiking options. So if you are into that kind of sport or sports, that is definitely the place to go. Next up was my drive down to Ticino, which is the Italian-speaking region of Switzerland, and you felt the Italian influence as soon as you entered that region, which was interesting because that drive down, I went through tunnel after tunnel. This was probably over the course of a 3 to 4 hour drive. And finally, you emerge out of that last tunnel and all the signs are in Italian. You start to see palm trees. It's just like a completely different world once you get out of that last tunnel. And Ticino is just this vibrant, mostly lakefront community. I'm not going to say community, it's a whole region, but it's dotted with all these villages along these lakes, and they're colorful and loud and just really robust and different from the rest of Switzerland. It was just like being in Italy, which I had never been to before this trip. I did jump over there for a hot minute for lunch, but as soon as I entered Ticino, I felt like I was in Italy, and that was a really cool experience to have. And in addition to these little towns, you also have these really historic properties that are just tucked in the valleys, and I'll save that for you to watch in the series, but God, it was such an incredible place, and I know it's a lesser visited region of Switzerland, but I could not recommend it more. And for the only French-speaking region that I visited, I went to Grimentz, which is just north of I think everyone knows the Matterhorn. Just north of that area, I wasn't able to get to the Matterhorn. This is kind of on the other side of that mountain range. But you're still looking at those classic peaks, those jagged, snow-capped mountains. And you're in these villages that are high up in the mountains that are just absolutely quintessential Swiss life. They are those dark buildings with the fiery red geraniums. I talk about this in my video, but it was what I imagined Switzerland to look like. And the lake that I visited there, that was something that I saw on a map. And I was just like, oh, that looks like a cool place to trek to. I had no idea, didn't see this in any brochures, but I saw it on a map, I pinned it, and I found a hike that led me there from Grimentz. And it was one of the most spectacular shades of blue I've ever seen in my life, and there was practically nobody there. So it was a really special experience for me. And finally, the conclusion of my trip, I arrived at Lauterbrunnen Valley, which was just, I mean, you see that in every picture of Switzerland, and it lived up to it and exceeded it. That valley is just, you think of Swiss Alps and how tall they are. And I always thought of Swiss Alps, and for some reason in my head, I just pictured them going up into the clouds. And that was exactly what the scene was when I arrived. And it was very cool to see the valley, all the waterfalls coming down. I was there on a couple of cloudy days, but just a phenomenal picture perfect region. And that's the same thing where you have the valley, but then you take transportation up to all these little towns dotted along the mountain. Each of them are very unique. I went to Wengen first, which was a little more uppity and very tourist friendly. Same thing with Mürren. But then I was also in Gimmelwald, and this is all in that valley. Gimmelwald was very quiet. I think there was like one shop there, but you know, that was again quintessential Swiss life. If you're looking to see that, that's where you would go. And I concluded my trip with the crazy Mürren Via Ferrata, which that is featured in the video, so go check that out. But if you want some adrenaline, there's a lot of things to do in this valley that are adrenaline related. But I think for me, this was, I read about it before going, and I wanted to challenge myself. And boy, did it deliver. So all of this stuff you can see on my Switzerland series, 4 parts. Check it out after this video. If you have any questions, which I'm sure you do because I kind of loosely covered a couple of things, but whatever questions you have, please leave them in the comments and I will be sure to answer them as best as I can. And please let me know how your Switzerland trip went. I have linked to the map in the description so you can download my official itinerary and use that as inspiration for your trip. All right, thanks so much for watching.